Are you daunted by invisible zips? I know I used to be, and then I discovered a way that's an easy way to sew them in. Please let me show you. I'm going to show you how to put an invisible zip into the back seam of a pair of capri pants that I'm making. Just makes it a little bit more live, I think, if it's on an actual garment. I'll turn my back pieces over so that the rear of the fabric is showing. I would like to support this invisible zip as it's being put in there, and when it's in use as well, when the zip is being pulled open and closed, there can be quite a lot of stress on this piece of fabric. I always keep little scraps of interfacing, and this is an iron-on interfacing. This scrap I've got here quite handily is the right length for this zip. Make sure I've got the gluey side, which is this shiny side on this interfacing, and I will press that in place onto both of these seams. You can see I've overlocked the edge there, but I'm just going to make sure that this interfacing is within where the seam allowance is. Gently press that in place. So I've got the two pieces of interfacing now stuck on the centre back seam to support that. I would do this also if I was making a cotton skirt or a wool skirt or anywhere else where I put an invisible zip just to give support. Got the right side facing me now. When we sew the zip on, we'll be sewing it on like this onto the front. So then when it's stitched on, it'd be like that. I find it easier to mark where the seam line is for when I'm stitching this in place. So I'll be marking along here my 5/8 seam allowance, or 1.5 centimetres maybe you use. I also want to mark where to start the top of the zip. So this part here, the metal stopper, I find I don't really want it to be 5/8 of an inch, the seam allowance down, because I find it fights with the waistband when I do that. So I always like to go a little bit lower. When I mark this down, I want to do the seam allowance and then add an extra 1/8 of an inch, just so that that little part there is a little bit lower down. There's my 5/8, and I want it to be about here where that starts. And I can see the top of the zip here, and I can match that up with that mark that I've put there. I shall mark the same on the other side as well, so we're all prepared. So the top is marked as well on this one, where to start sewing. Most sewing machines come with a zipper foot. It looks something like this. It's got a little space on this side and on the other side. You can sew an invisible zip in with a regular zipper foot. And just to show you, when you are stitching along, you can have it on the side like this, and the needle coming down, and it will go along this edge quite happily. So if you've only got this sort of foot, you can use that. Or I do have a invisible zip foot, and this one, the grooves here will fit onto the side of the zip there, and when it's stitching down, it'll go along, opening this up but also sewing just inside here. So this is easier if you want to invest in one, but yeah, I recommend it. But you can sew your zip in with this foot as well. So I'm going to change my foot. I've got my regular foot on that I use at the moment. I'll click that off and put my zipper foot on. I always put the thread through that hole there. Now your invisible zip foot might differ slightly, but they all have got a similar look about them. If we tack this zip in position, it's less likely that it will move around and more likely it will stay in the correct place. When you're looking at your zip tape, be mindful that the tape side needs to go to the seam, so it's going in this way around. I have sewn them in this way around before, believe you me, but it's not a good idea because it's the wrong way. So just be thoughtful, it's that way, and think about it. When it's stitched in, you're not going to see the tape. Just a little top tip, so tape to the seam. And then where that cross is there, I've got my top of the metal part of the tape there. I want to put that at that cross mark there. Place the teeth of the zip on the seam line. And I will tack this in place. So keeping the teeth of the zip on the line that we've drawn. So we're keeping the zip securely in the right position, ready for the actual proper sewing of it. So I'm at the machine. I've got these two spaces for the zip teeth to go on this side. It needs to be on the right side, and you can sort of see that when the needle's going down, it's going to go into this groove here. And now, as I'm sewing this seam, I will gently tease the zip open with my fingertips. Obviously being careful of fingertips as well. Don't want to go through my fingers. When you get to the bottom of the zip, go as far as you can, really. So about here will do. Then I'll do a reverse. And that's that side in. So now we need to stitch the other side of the zip onto the other seam. Be mindful again that we need to turn it and turn it so that the zip tape is facing the seam. And again, I can mark my metal top of the zipper to that cross mark I made there. The teeth are along the seam line that I made, and I can tack that in place so it stays secure in the correct place while we're sewing it in. Teeth along the seam line. So this time I'll go under the left groove on the foot, and then I'll open up the zipper tape, but start doing a reverse stitch first of all. And then come back to doing forwards. With my fingertips, just opening up the zipper teeth. So here's the zip stitched in. I'll just close it up, check everything's looking okay, which it is. I'm quite happy with that. Now I need to finish sewing this seam. This is a crotch seam on these capri pants, but it could be the back of a skirt or a side seam of a skirt or something like that. I'll show you what to do. So I'll pop some pins in as normally would for a seam. So now I can remove my invisible zip foot. I've finished with that. And now to help me with this, start this side seam, I'm going to put my regular zipper foot on. There are two sides to the zipper foot. There's a little indentation there, and there's one on this side. And I've got it set so that my needle, when it goes down, it goes just to the right of that indentation there. The seam that I stitched for the zip ends here, and what I'm going to do with my zipper foot to help me is stitch just to the left of that and go up maybe 2 or 3 stitches to overlap where those stitches are. See, my zip stitches end here. I'll put my foot down there, hold the thread out of the way. Be careful your fingertips doing this because it's a little bit close for comfort, but I'm going to do a few reverse stitches. And they've gone just adjacent to those zip stitches that I did. And now I can work forward. Now I've got to a place where it's more flat. I'm going to stop, put my regular foot on, because I could do the seam with this zip foot, but it's a bit dangerous with my fingertips and it's not supporting the fabric quite as much as I would like. Time to change the foot again. So now I can go back to where that seam was being stitched and I can finish sewing my seam. Stitch the seam and you can see here where the zip stitching was and where the seam stitching is, and they've just overlapped slightly. On the right side it looks fine. That's where the zip is and where the seam starts. So I hope that's been useful for you to learn how to do an invisible zip with confidence.